Don't need it.
All right, cool. Everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. I want to move through this part as quickly as possible so that we can get to the sermon, which I'm really excited about. But I do want to set some context of where we're coming from when we talk about empire. That you're going to hear us talking a lot about this house that we're living in, and we want people to have a clear context of what we're talking about. So first and foremost, when we talk about empire, I'm just writing these up so that you can just have a visual. There's three major components of what we're thinking about, right? The first thing that we're talking about is one centralized government, right? Right? So, all of the, when you think about Rome, right? All the roads lead to Rome, right? It's a centralized place that you could, tangibly think about where all the power decisions were being made, right? The second thing that we talk about when we're thinking about this is that this entity, this government, and this nation actually influences all other nations, right? It influences all other nations through media, right? Through culture, through language, right? So a Roman citizen could go anywhere in the world and could find the influence of that culture there, right? Because of how they were impacting it. Could also find their language, right? So people had to learn, Latin at that time? People had to learn Latin? Help me. No, I'm thinking about for Rome, right? So it's either Greek or Latin, right? That people needed to know, and that was what was influencing the people of that time, right? And you could come up with other examples of this, okay? I didn't write that up there because it's a little bit longer. One government influences other nations, right? Through lots of different ways. And last but not least, right? Nations have to think about the empire before they make any kinds of decisions, and oftentimes also have to consult. Right? Mm-hmm. So people weren't just willy-nilly making decisions about what they wanted to do during the Roman Empire's dynasty, right? Or however you want to talk about that, right? Mm-hmm. What they had to do is they had to think about what is Rome going to say about this decision that I'm making as a nation. And then even the people in that nation, smaller decisions that they would make, they would think about how is this going to impact my relationship to Rome. Y'all with me? Yeah. Good. So, what'd I say?
You have to think about yourself, the empire, when you make decisions.
I spelled that wrong. Okay? So again, one government, all roads lead to Rome, influences other nations, right, through lots of different ways. Other nations have to think about it whenever making decisions and oftentimes consult as well. All right? So there's lots of other ways that you can talk about empire. You can make this a beautiful sentence or paragraph or whatever you want to do around it. But these are the basic principles of when we're talking about. And when we are actually referring to empire, and a lot of times in this room, we're actually talking about America. Right? Mm-hmm. And that, and the reason I use America and not the United States, if people are, maybe folks are in trouble by that. When I was in Colorado, this was always a thing that was lifted up. Why do we always refer to ourselves as America instead of the United States? I use that language to remind me that I'm living in an empire, right? And the way that we know this is because I can go to any country, anywhere in the world, and I can say I'm American, and people know where I'm from. Mm-hmm. They don't assume I'm South American, or coming from a South American country or Central American. Yeah. They don't assume that I'm Canadian. Mm-hmm. They assume that I'm from the United States of America. Mm-hmm. Y'all see what I'm getting at? That's a clear indication of there's something going on that's deeper. There's real power at play. All right, so y'all with me? Everybody's good with that?
Yes, sir.
Cool. So now I'm just going to draw the house. And when we're talking about this house, right, there's lots of different ways in which you could talk about the United States. There's a history that you can move into. that talks about like how this country was fundamentally built on freedom, and you can talk about that the ideology around these things is deeply. I know he's like trying to overtime. Yeah, this is my son for real. We could talk about that there is an American dream that people often want to live into, that it's a beautiful dream. You could talk about all those things, right? And that there is some truth to the narrative of that. And there is a reality about how this house is actually situated, where it came from, and what it does. And that those two things are constantly in conflict with one another. And so I know that there will be people in the room that are going to have a reaction to this. And just remembering and being able to sit in both those worlds is deeply important if we're going to have a conversation about empire and why it's important to understand in our context. Cool? Cool. All right. So, there are 3 components to a house. Simple components. I don't build houses every day, but I'm pretty sure that these are true, right? The first thing is a foundation. You have to have a strong foundation to build a strong house. Right? Would anybody disagree with that? All right. Then you need to have like walls, right? Pillars, things that are holding up the house. You cannot just have paper. Oops. Y'all get the picture. You cannot just have paper that's like holding. You have to have strong structures that keep the house from falling down and collapsing on itself. Right? Everybody's good with that? Mm-hmm. And then the last element of a house, right, especially if it's a single level, I've created more of a mansion type style. It's a very large house. The last piece for this, right, is the roof. Right? And the roof kind of protects the house from the elements, right? If it rains, roof keeps it from the house from getting wet. If it snows, it keeps the house from getting overtaken by snow, right? Okay, cool. So when we talk about this particular house, we're thinking about this from the perspective of foundation, structure, walls, right? And the roof. And all of these different pieces represent something to the house. So the bottom level of the house, right, the strongest part of the house, there are 4 major elements that we think about when we think about the foundation of this house that we call empire. The first thing that we think about is, we call this white supremacy. Y'all have heard this term before? What I mean by this term is very simply the ideology that there is a hierarchy of power, right? And that the supreme amount of power and the supreme amount of everything belongs to white people. And that there is a sliding scale from there. And that people fit up and down that scale at different times in our history. But there is a very clear white on top and particularly black on bottom. And then there's a scale that happens in that, okay? Mm-hmm. So the second one that we oftentimes refer to is capitalism. So capitalism is an economic system, but it's also driven by a particular ideology that speaks to people win and people lose. There are haves and there are have-nots, right? And that there's a market that people all should have access to, and if you succeed, then you're great. If you don't, there's something wrong with you. Okay? Capitalism. The third is patriarchy. Okay? The ideology that they're, first and foremost, that the male, like men, are like the power, like they're the power, right? And there is a sliding scale again, and that there is a binary between men and women being on the bottom, and a particular type of woman being on the bottom, and a particular type of man being on the top. And then in between all this conversation about what makes a real man and what doesn't. What makes a real woman and what doesn't. Y'all with me? Mm-hmm. Right? So there's this scale around, like, that's where you get, like, people talking about effeminate men and masculine women and all these different kinds of ideologies around what makes a woman and what makes a man. And then all the context that's involved in that. That's where we get all this ideology. Okay? Last but not least, imperial Christianity. Notice I say imperial Christianity and not just Christianity, which I think is really deeply important for us to understand and recognize that there is a type of Christianity that exists in the world that is not the original intent of what it was supposed to become. That it was co-opted long ago, but that it is the dominant Christian culture. And particularly, it was designed and is still designed to this day to help to protect the house. Y'all with me? So, for example, when you have a conversation about white supremacy, this, right, imperial Christianity comes and makes a statement around why we should have slavery, why it's important to have slavery, and why slaves shouldn't rise up against their masters. Y'all with me? And we use those scriptures to help to uphold the belief system. You could go down the list of all these things and how they've been used. I think the rising up against the powers is the one that's like most resident in my mind right now because it was just used again recently. Y'all recognized it? Right? Jeff Sessions gets up and he's speaking, right, about in a speech. And he uses this scripture to get people to like fall into line. Right? See, the scriptures tell us that we're not supposed to rise up against power, right? That God put us in power and that you all are just supposed to get in line. And what's very interesting about that and why my ears start ringing is because it was the same scriptures that were used to make sure that my people were slaves. Okay? So, this is the foundation of the house, and it works in all these different kind of crazy ways. Right, that we don't have time to get into, but over the time that we spend together over this year, over our lifespan, we're going to understand this thing. And my hope is that we would dismantle it and build something better. Yeah. Right? And that we all have a place and a part to do to dismantle it. And so this is how it plays out. So then you get into the structures. The structures are very simple. There are things like media. There are things like education. Our education system is steeped in this. Right? All of our religions are steeped in this in some form or fashion. Our politics are steeped in this. So you could be a Democrat or a Republican. You know what I just said too? A Democrat or a Republican, you still caught up in this thing. You don't get to escape this and you don't get to judge each other. That's good. We're all sitting in this house. And the house is like, there's all these other structures, you can think about it. And one of the major ones that really stresses me out is the nonprofits. Because I work for a nonprofit. I am helping to uphold this system too. Yeah. There's some words I want to say about that, but I'm not going to. It just makes me so angry. Right? So there's all these different kinds of things that are helping to uphold this structure. And then the last thing, the roof, is the ideologies that flow into our minds, that help us to make sure that the house stays protected. Right? So it's, you think about white supremacy. Let's talk about the criminal justice system. Okay? And let's talk particularly about a black person having an encounter with a police officer, white or black or Mexican or whatever, you name it. They have an encounter with one another. The black person gets killed, right? And then there's a narrative that goes out that asks the question, what did he do wrong? Right? And that there is an assumption, particularly about black people, but just in general, there's an assumption about black men that says that they have a higher propensity to do crime. And so because they have a higher propensity to do crime, I have to ask the question when this black person gets killed, what they did wrong. Because they must have deserved it. That protects the house.
Yeah. That's good.
That's just one example. there are many ways in which we use these ideologies to protect the thing we don't even like. We don't even like this thing. I'm in a relationship with so many people in this room that are just like, this thing is killing me. It's killing me and my family. Whether it's because I have to work myself to death or because I'm afraid to go outside at nighttime because I'm afraid of how people might treat me if I'm in the wrong neighborhood. Yeah. People fit into this house and it is killing us. So the last thing that I want to say about the house is that the house has a radon problem in the basement. And there are people living in the basement. There are people living all up and down the house and all these rooms. The people in the basement are screaming that the house is poisoned. They're banging, they're kicking, they're breaking things, they're burning things, trying to get everybody's attention that the house is poisoned. Everybody's dying. Everyone's slowly poisoned. But the people in the basement are the loudest because they're seeing it manifest the quickest. Y'all with me? So when you see people screaming out angry about what's happening, when they're rioting and when they're doing all these things that they're doing in the world, what they're saying is the house is on fire or the house is poisoned. We're all in danger and we got to get out. But the people up top are saying, I don't see the house like that. I'm not sick. And then when they see someone die on the top because of the poison, they're like, it must have been their fault. It must have been something they did. They should eat better. Because the house is designed to protect itself. So what we're going to be doing from here on out, we're going to get out of this house and we're going to drag our people out. Kicking and screaming, we're going to build something better. Dave.
Anybody else ready to just fight? I feel like, is no one else like jumping out of their seat right now?
I'm ready to go.
Whenever Will talks, I'm just like, all right, let's go. So does anyone have any idea what in the world this has to do with faith? Is it confusing to you that this would be the context that we build our conversation about faith around? Like, please raise your hand if you're confused. No one's confused. This makes sense. You're confused. Thank you. Right. Anyone else? Yeah, all right. What in the world does this have to do with pistis?
Come on,
Shelby. Now, before we can have any clue about what this means, we have to understand how we've engaged with the word faith. How many of you have heard faith essentially equated with belief? It's a belief system. Raise it, show of hands. Beautiful. Okay. Not a stretch now. Okay, but what we're going to do is define faith very differently today. Not because we're making up a new definition or playing some revisionist history game, but we're going to actually define it by the way that it was used. A novel idea.
Come on.
All right. So, pistis in the scriptures, this Greek word, is most accurately translated as confidence or trust or allegiance. Confidence, trust, or allegiance. You don't hear the word belief there, do you? And in Hebrews, in the book of Hebrews, not in the Hebrew Scriptures, but in the book of Hebrews, which is a New Testament book, a Christian Scriptures book, it says this in Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So we have substance, which is a thing, and evidence, which is also something. You also, once again, do not hear the word what in there? Belief. Hone in on this. Okay. But we don't find the equivalent word of pistis in the Hebrew Scriptures very often. And we have a rabbi who may not be able to confirm or deny this, but in the Hebrew Scriptures, the equivalent word to pistis is used twice. And in your Bibles, your Christian Bibles that include the Hebrew Scriptures, you'll notice that the much bigger section is what? The Hebrew Scriptures. What many people are accustomed to calling the Old Testament. We don't use that phrase in this church, and if you are wondering why, we'll explain another time. But the equivalent word is used twice. In the New Testament, it's used 245 times.
Yeah.
Now, why do you think that is? Do you think that it's because ancient Hebrew people were not interested in faith in God? That wasn't an important concept for them? So they just didn't write about it very often? Or might it be that the context in which the New Testament takes place is very different? So if context is different, that means language is different. That means the things we talk about are different. And so the first thing I want to address is whenever a person, especially an evangelical Christian, tells you that the Bible doesn't talk about white supremacy or capitalism or racism, well, guess what? The Hebrew Bible doesn't talk a whole lot about faith. Context changes everything. Everything. We have to start there. So what was the context in which the New Testament was written? Well, we'll set the scene for us a little bit, that Rome was the empire of the day. And they had basically taken over what was known to be the entire Western world. So there were Asian and sort of Eastern empires going on, but Rome covered most of the world for 1,000 years. And so within this realm, the New Testament is written. The Roman Empire is the backdrop. It's the house. And Caesar was emperor. And one of the phrases that we find not just in history books, but plastered all over statues is, Caesar is Lord. And that we should have our pistis, our faith, put our pistis in Caesar. Our faith should be placed in Caesar, in Rome. These are common phrases that were used in the first century. Not only that, Caesar was known as the Prince of Peace, as the Son of God. I'm not making this stuff up. So, you have now some understanding that in order to be a Roman citizen, what did you have to do? You had to pledge your faith to Caesar. Anyone, does this resonate with anything that we experience then?
Yeah, bro.
What do we pledge our faith to these days? We pledge our allegiance to what? It's over there. We hit it. What did that mean, though? I mean, beyond words, what did it mean to pledge your allegiance to Caesar? It meant that you worshipped his gods. It meant that you believed in his way. It meant that you believed he actually made peace the way that you needed him to make peace. And again, since this is the backdrop that Jesus and all his disciples are functioning, it was a time called the Pax Romana, known as the Peace of Rome. Now, who was this peace for? Caesar and his folks. Was it peace for the thousands upon thousands of Jewish people who were crucified because they didn't align with Caesar? No. And when Will aptly named the narrative that's talked about in our country about freedom, economic prosperity, all these beautiful things that only America holds, who is it free for? And who has opportunity here? Not the people on whose backs were used to build this empire. Right? It benefits the people who stole those folks and brought them over. There's a very similar narrative going on here. And that is why in the first century, after Jesus, that the first Christians were called faithless. Now, nowadays you'll hear people say, like, Christians were called atheists. Well, that's because we use belief systems to describe things. But they weren't atheists. Like, it wasn't about a belief system. Caesar doesn't care if you believe in him. He cares if you pledge your faith to him. He cares that you're going to fight his fight. Right? I don't care if you believe in me. I exist. I want you to fight with me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So the first Christians wouldn't fight for Caesar. They would not pledge their loyalty to the games or to Caesar, so they were faithless. They were not loyal to Rome. The definition of this word is very important, my friends. The first Christians were not atheists, they were faithless. They were un-Roman. I've been called un-American more times than I can count. Some people went to the Baptist church I used to go to. I was called un-American there more than anything else, other than maybe heretic or something else. But whenever I would take shots at nationalism, I would be called un-American. And I said, well, thank God, I wish we were all un-American. We'll get more definition around that, I hope.
That's good, man.
So the first Christians are without faith. But not without faith, they're without faith in Caesar. They had found their hope in this rabbi wandering around called Yeshua. They had found their hope in his ways, in the kingdom that he was describing. And they pledged their loyalty to that kingdom, which was this little nothing in the midst of a gigantic force that dominated the whole world. And so they sort of created their own community here. And Julie, who's not here today, but she posted something on our Facebook page, the ministry team's page, about a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a chosen people. Did anyone see this? It's a scripture in 1 Peter that describes this new community. They're saying we're a community within this gigantic empire, but we're not going to adhere to those rules. We're a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a chosen race. It's a beautiful image that they have. It's not about beliefs, it's about a different loyalty. So I wonder, what is it that prevents us from having faith the way that the first Christians did? Or the way that the first Jewish followers of the way did, I should say. Because they were willing to go to death for this. How many would die for a belief system? Right. Not one of you. Because I wouldn't either. Then there must have been something different about that first community that made them willing to die for a different loyalty. The first reason I will say that I don't think we have faith, the way that the first people did, is that we talk about it in all sorts of weird ways. Right? We talk about it in ways that are about intellectual assent. It's about affirming a bunch of things that makes you Christian or not Christian. So, I have a belief system. And that means that if I believe a certain kind of way, that's different from the way that you believe, then I'm in the right, you're in the wrong. We're separate because of the way we think.
Okay.
Right? So, one of the reasons that we don't have this understanding of faith is because it's been linked with, I can affirm this number of things, and that's what makes me Christian. Is that making sense? Mm-hmm. Anyone that's not tracking with that, I really want to know so that I can explain it better. We have built a Christian religious system. Right? It's a religious system. This is not what's going on in the first century. They don't have a religious system that they're following after. They have a new king. They have a different person that they're pledging their loyalty to. Let me make sure I'm tracking with my notes because I want to make sure I get this right. This is, for real, this is big. I know it's fundamentally shifting some things. How many of you, again, have ever heard of faith as loyalty or allegiance? There's one of you. So I want to make sure I take this seriously. So I'm going to follow my notes for a second. Sound good? All right. You can snap or something to make me know you're tracking.
I wish you did.
We've not seen how faith in Christ draws us into healing for ourselves and our community. Because we simply believe in Christ, but have placed our faith in Caesar. So we believe in the cross and the resurrection, but we've put our hope in the White House.
Yeah,
Say that again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me say it again, Lou.
Yeah. Yeah.
We believe in the cross and the resurrection, but we've placed our hope in the White House. This is the state of things. And when white supremacy and imperial Christianity are combined, what does a belief system do to you? It neuters you. It makes you completely ineffectual, and it makes you stay in that house because you think that within that house there is some chance that you're going to be healed or you're going to get some freedom.
Yeah.
That maybe you'll move up to the top floor. And that's the good life. That's what we're shooting after. That, I believe, is the first and primary reason that we don't understand faith through the lens of the scriptures. The second reason I would say, and I learned this phrase very recently thanks to my therapist, is learned helplessness. There is this, what do you call it? An experiment that was done on a dog in a cage. And there's this cage, and a dog is going from one corner to the next. One corner is shocked, next corner shocked. You get the picture? All four corners, the dog's getting shocked. Like, has a collar or something like that. And then the dog goes to the middle of the cage. And what do? They shock the dog. And then after that, the dog goes nowhere. Because what has the dog internalized? I can't win. What's the point? Learned helplessness. There is nothing that I can do to change this situation that I'm in or that the people in this room are in. So what does it do when you try? What do you got?
I think there's nothing you can do.
Yes. You've internalized this belief that there's nothing that you can do.
That's good.
How many feel it? And so, what Christian theology has done so well is we have learned to hold on to the end. Jesus is coming back. That's when everything's going to be A-okay. Friends, that comes out of not only learned helplessness, but a faulty belief system. That someday it's going to be all right, and we don't have to do anything to participate in making it better now. This is what I was raised in. I don't know about you. I was raised with, we hold on. Because when Jesus comes back, it's all going to be better. Now, I'm not saying it's not. I'm not trying to mess with anyone's belief about Jesus returning or anything like that. I'm just saying that belief system has neutered us, again, to not think that we have any role to play in the kingdom of God arriving on earth as it is in heaven. Jesus, my friends, was not recruiting believers. He was recruiting and empowering people to toss mountains into the sea. And he uses this very famous example. He says that if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can take this mountain and tell it to go into the sea. How many have heard that before? How many have heard the phrase, faith can move mountains? Even if you didn't grow up Christian, right? Now, what many people believe, and I really like this because I think it's great imagery, is that he was pointing to a particular mountain. Now, in Bethlehem, around Jerusalem, there was, at the time, a man named King Herod the Great. He was the king that was sort of appointed to oversee this area. And he loved himself so much. How many have heard of King Herod before? He's in the Christian scriptures. There's a story around him. What does he do in the birth narrative of Jesus? Under the age of... Yeah. So genocide of his own people. Great start for this guy. So we already don't like him, right? But the people of his day liked him even less. Because he used his own people as slaves to take two hills that were really close to each other and to fill them in and to construct a gigantic mountain castle for himself that he called the Herodium. Just so you know, I'm going to take a step in that direction and name this church after myself. I mean, think about it. He names this thing after himself. Everyone can recognize his power and might. This is Herod's. There's no mistaking about it. He used our people to build it. And so we always have to look at this thing. He uses his own people as slaves to build him out. Who was used to build that house?
All of us.
Let's say it. What did you just say? Will?
All of us.
All of us.
We built it.
Yes, enslaved people literally. But everyone in this room has been used and abused and dehumanized in a way that props up this mountain.
Yeah.
Are we tracking?
Yeah.
So he takes two hills and makes them one. And this mountain would have symbolized everything that we're talking about. The ever-present reminder of an oppressive regime. And here comes this rabbi amassing a following. Not trying to achieve the throne, not trying to say, let's take out Herod or Caesar, but empowering a bunch of normal people to have faith in something other than the golden eagle, the stars and stripes. And he says, if you have faith this small, you can say to that mountain, get up and be thrown into the sea.
Yeah, Dave. Yes.
Faith, therefore, is not, I believe something and I hope it happens. But I have within me the power to overthrow oppressive regimes. I don't think you're hearing me. And the evidence of that is that not all of you are throwing tables right now. Because you still don't believe that we can change things. I still don't. Faith, this small, will enable us to say, get up and be thrown into the sea.
Yeah.
Yeshua comes to liberate his people, not to invite them into a religion. But in our context, a person of faith is a person who fits into a nice, tidy religious system. But belief does not liberate. It pacifies. What I mean by, how many kids have a pacifier? You want your kid to shut up and put a thing in their mouth. That's what belief does to us.
Yeah.
That is what belief does to us. And I'm suggesting that we get the belief knocked out of us so we can have faith.
Spit it up.
Yeah, spit out that pacifier. Not scary, I get it. It's scary. But you want healing? You want nothing to do with that thing that within which the foundation has taught us a certain number of things? I guarantee you that a lot of the things we have internalized and believed about a first century Jewish person are not accurate. I guarantee it. If you grew up in this system, black, white, Latino, I don't care your tradition. You have heard something about this first century rabbi that is not accurate. And so what does he go around doing? What does he do? He goes around and does what?
Starts
Healing.
healing.
He starts healing people.
Starts healing people, man.
He starts setting people free
Yeah.
in the midst of oppressive regimes. And what happens when he does it?
People get angry.
Without fail, people get angry. Who's going to get angry if one of you is like laying down on the ground because you can't walk and then I heal you? Who's getting angry about that? The person that benefits from you being lame.
Health insurance companies.
Exactly. You think this system doesn't benefit from us being sick? You think nonprofits don't benefit from us being homeless? This is the state that we're in. And I, for one, don't want myself or anyone I love to have to be faced with that sickness over and over and over again. And so that's what Yeshua goes around doing. He's like, if you have faith, not if you believe you're going to get better, not if you pray and just really, really believe with all your might that that person's going to get better. But if you have faith, if you have allegiance, if you have loyalty to the kingdom of God and not the house, you're going to be set free. Now here's our problem. We cannot imagine what that looks like. Right?
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that looks like. But until we've named it, we're never going to be able to see anything different. So that's why it's so important to name it. If we don't show you what the house looks like that you're living in, you're going to think it's fine, and you're going to think, well, there are solutions within this house for me to get better. Right? There's medicine, there's different ways for me to build wealth. You know, there's different avenues for me to get better. But anyone that's ever been a part of the system, if you've received welfare services or food stamps, or if you've been in a shelter before, you know that nothing about that system was made to get you out of it.
Yeah.
It gets you stuck, does it not?
Yes.
Learned helplessness. We believe what's in front of us. We believe what we're told. Why would we trust anything else? Because guess what? We've been told, especially people like me growing up in the system, that we got the freest country in the world. That's what I believe. If I really want healing, then I've got to start to have my eyes open to something different. And this is why Jesus is always saying, for those who have ears to hear and those who have eyes to see, a different world is possible. A different world is possible. Also, why the heck? Someone asked why we come to church. One of our 5-year-olds. Why do we come to church? I was like, great question. Why do you come to church? Is it because you think another world's possible? Or because you wanted to get a shot before you watch the game and then come back next week for another shot? That's what the house does to us.
Bro, ask that again, man.
Making me say things that I don't remember.
Bro.
Why do you come here? Why do you bother? Because I'm not here to feel better about myself. And I hope you're not. I hope you're coming because you want a better world. Jesus cared about a better world now, which is why he said what in his most famous prayer? Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. What do you think God's will is? What do you think?
If I ask for bread, he won't give me a stone.
If you ask for bread, you get bread.
Yep.
That's simple. What else? Go ahead.
Real love.
What's that?
Real love.
Real love.
No conditions on it. Just do it because it's what it's supposed to do.
Shared belongings.
Shared belongings.
And be happy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Joy.
Enjoy.
Experience
Joy.
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 Come on, keep shouting it out. What does the kingdom look like? Equality. You want a better world, you better start to imagine what it could look like.
Peace among all living people.
Peace among all living people. Amen.
That's awesome.
One big family.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal from Will. You build your house for you to live in, not to give to someone else.
Yeah. Yeah, that's,
You benefit from your labor.
yeah, you benefit from your labor.
That's the
Not
Bible.
the
That
people
ain't
at the
me.
top. Come on. What's that?
Bible has translated.
Community.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Abundance.
What?
Abundance.
Abundance. How many of you believe that that's God's will? I'm here to tell you something. God's will is not being done on earth as it is in heaven. Now that messes with some theological belief systems.
Is God's will going to be done in terms, or is it gonna happen slowly, or, you know, I haven't read the whole Bible, I've read pieces,
That's
I
good.
get little Bible flecks.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great question. Great question. Is God's will going to be done when, would you say, when Jesus returns? Right? Or is it slow? What is our experience of the world? Certainly not evidence of that kingdom that we just all described. But why? Here's the question that I want us to leave asking today. And I hope that it sticks with you while you're watching the Patriots lose. That was a joke. I don't care who wins. It was a joke. I don't care who wins. Why are things the way that they are? Do you know why? Because empire is strong.
Yes.
Because the powers and principalities that sort of have run this world for a long time, they have made you think that this is the way things are supposed to be for thousands of years. And we have not imagined something different. We have not taken this, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, then you can move this mountain. We have not believed his words. We haven't. We've been taught by people who we trusted to not actually, I don't know what that is.
It's the radon.
Scaring me a little
It's the
bit.
radon meter.
It's the radon. We got to get out. The question for you to leave with, James, the question for you to leave with is, why don't I want to leave this house?
Yeah, that's good.
Why don't you want to leave this house? Why don't I want to leave this house? And I would guess it's because we don't believe that another world is possible. We don't have faith. And now I know that's a trigger, because a lot of us have been told we don't have strong enough faith to make things change, right? We've been told that someone didn't get healed because you didn't have faith.
Yeah.
Maybe some of you haven't heard that, but I heard that many times growing up. I was taught that my father didn't get better because I didn't believe enough. It's not true.
No.
We don't have faith that another world is possible because it's been beaten out of us. All of us. Some of us more than others. But I'm telling you right now, if two or more are gathered, having faith in a kingdom that can withstand against the most violent attack, then there ain't nothing that can stop us. Nothing. It's going to keep growing. It starts small, but it's going to keep growing. I'm not talking about having a big church. I'm talking about knocking out that house and bringing other people with us. Do you believe that? Do you want that? Forget belief. Do you want that? I want it. So wrestle this week with, why don't I want to get out? What's keeping me here? What's keeping me here? I'm sorry, I was asking myself that. I don't know, and I'm going to search it out. But I invite you to do the same. What do you want? Kristen said something about